So they fasted and prayed all that day. Come evening time, no rain. It's crystal clear like it is this evening. He went down the thing and felt real bad. His prayers hadn't been answered. As he lay down on the rock looking up, he noticed a small speck of a cloud directly overhead. As he watched it, it unfolded and grew and grew and grew. Eventually it filled the sky and soft rain started to fall. It fell for the next few weeks. The crops revived, the game returned, the fields were full of fish, and you know the rest of the story. Latter part of September, they had a wonderful harvest. They invited the Indians in, bought deer, and that was the first Thanksgiving. A direct result of the fasting, praying of those wonderful people. And our Father which art in heaven answered their prayers. Now let's get back just a minute. 1492, you know the story of Columbus. Columbus was really a genius. He had for 10 years had this strong prompting of what he called the Spirit, that he needed to go find a different route to India. He was turned down for 10 years, and finally he had the good fortune of having someone authorize him to try to find the east by going towards the west. You know the rest of the story. Built the ships, got the ships, took off to America, came around, discovered this islands down in the island area in the south part of the United States. And then they explored that area, and eventually one of the ships was destroyed, and now he had to go back. And now this is the real miracle of Columbus. At that point in time, they'd had their good luck and they'd had their bad luck. But that year, in 1492, as he was returning back to Portugal and Spain, off of the Canary Islands, he ran into one of the worst storms in history. Hundreds, I mean literally hundreds of ships were destroyed. The coasts were filled with ships that had been destroyed. The islands were covered with them. He was able to go into port, and they said, "You better stay here." And he said, "No, I gotta get on." The storm had cooled down, and he took off again, headed towards Spain. This time, he ran into a storm that was much worse than the first one. By the time that storm was over 1,000 ships had been destroyed. I believe that was somebody trying to stop him from getting back to the old world with the good news. But he survived, and he himself submitted to the Spirit had guided him to America, and that he was preserved by a providential assistance. And so the story goes. We now have the Pilgrims. One last story, then we'll get into the real story I want to talk about tonight, and that's the story of the Puritans. 1620, the Pilgrims came. 1630, the Puritans came. The difference between the Puritans and the Pilgrims was simply this. The Pilgrims felt there was no use wasting their time. Let's just get out of here. They left. The Puritans said, "No, let's stick around. Maybe we can change things." Well, they weren't able to do it. So in 1630, a lot of the Puritans came to America. My ancestors came here in 1630 and landed in Scituate, Massachusetts. Well, the interesting thing about this, the leader of the Puritans was a minister named Thomas Hooker. Hooker was really a brilliant and good man. Hooker took his people and settled them along the Connecticut River. There were 3 or 4 little communities. About a year into the process of building their little villages, he decided that they needed to work together to find some type of unity to protect each other and help each other. So a meeting was called, and Thomas Hooker delivered a speech. The speech ended up resulting in the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which is the first constitution in the history of the United States. That's a constitution. He used as his source for his talks Deuteronomy, the 2nd chapter. So now we have the first form of government, the Mayflower Compact by the Pilgrims, the Christians, the first constitution by Thomas Hooker, a Christian, and now the Constitution. We'll get into that a little bit later. From 1620, when the Pilgrims in 1630s, to 1675, again June 15th, there was relative peace in the New World. 1671, King Philip's War started, lasted for a while. About 1,200 Pilgrims were killed at that time. Had that happened earlier, it would have been a different story. we may not be here today, but thank heavens it didn't. They survived that. And from 1675 to nearly 40, a change took place in America. The people became very complacent, somewhat like we are today. And they took the Christian heritage and beliefs like milk toast. Some of them lived it, and they became very liberal and started walking away from a strong belief in Jesus Christ. And so a group of really wonderful, wonderful men decided this shouldn't be, if we're going to receive the blessings that Providence has for us, we need to get back on track. And so started the great period known as the Awakening, 1640. In 1640, a wonderful gentleman, Jonathan Edwards, who was an evangelist, started going around the country preaching that we need to change our ways. Most importantly, another gentleman came from England. This gentleman was probably one of the most articulate speakers ever. George Whitefield was his name. George lived in England. Between 1640 and 1670, he made 13 trips to the United States. In fact, he spent the equivalent of 2 years traveling on the ocean in one of those wooden ships, which is not like a modern-day cruise ship. It wouldn't have been a great experience. He spent 2 years. He had an incredible ability to teach. In fact, where's Ben? Did Ben leave? This happened to Ben. Ben heard about Mr. Whitefield, and he'd heard that he could speak to 30,000 people and be heard. Now, Ben, being the scientist he was, decided, I don't believe that. And so Whitefield came to Boston to teach and preach. So George decided, well, I'm going to check this out. So he wanders up and down the streets in Philadelphia and listening to hear how far he could get away from George and hear him. Now I want to read you a little narrative that is really kind of fun. Here we have Whitefield. He was called the boy preacher because when he started in 1670, he was only 19. Whitefield, the boy preacher, arrived in America in 1738 at age 19. He carried on and amplified, literally, amplified his work started by Edwards. Edwards, the other evangelist. He carried on and amplified the work by Edwards. Whitefield was America's first traveling evangelist. He preached in hundreds of towns and villages within the colonies. Edwards had the original mind, was by far more profound thinker than was Whitefield. However, Whitefield had the voice and the movements to really attract people. Without the assistance of electronic devices, he could be heard clearly by 30,000 people. One especially spellbinding sermon was delivered from the courthouse steps of Philadelphia. The mob filled the Market Street and stretched down 2nd Street. The people of Philadelphia crammed their necks out of their windows to hear him lambast the great clergy of their standing orders, calling them unconverted strangers to Christ. Then he said this, "Father Adams," Whitefield said, "whom have you in heaven? Do you have any Episcopalians?" "No." "Any Presbyterians?" "No." "Any Independents or Cedars?" "No." "Any Methodists?" "No." "Whom have you there?" "Abraham." "We don't know those names here. All who have come here are Christian believers in Christ, men who have overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony." "Oh, that's the case. Then God help me, God help us all to forget having names and become Christians in deed and truth." This was the vein of his teaching. He'd wave his arms and become very violent through his gestures and shouted and danced to the delight of the gathering throngs. During one of Whitefield's sermons, people would shriek or roll on the ground, dissolve into tears, and run wild with religious ecstasy. Even the agnostic Scottish philosopher David Hume, who was really an intellectual, once said of Whitefield that it was worth traveling 20 miles to hear him. Now, 20 miles may not seem much to you, but to walk 20 miles is something altogether different. Now, here comes our Ben Franklin. Skeptic Ben Franklin provided the following account of Whitefield's sermon that he attended in Philadelphia himself. It happened soon afterwards to attend one of to attend one of the sermons, in the course of which I perceived he intended to finish with a collection plate. So I silently resolved that he should get nothing from me. I had in my pocket a handful of copper, there's pennies, some 3 or 4 silver coins, probably $5 or so, and 5 gold coins. As he proceeded, that is, as Whitefield proceeded to talk, I began to soften and concluded to give him the coppers. Another stroke of the oratory made me ashamed, and I determined maybe I ought to give him some silver. He finished so admirably, said Brigham Franklin, that I emptied my pockets into the collection dish, got gold and all, and left.